5 seconds. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the school board's work session, which has been scheduled for today for the purpose of discussing the following school board policies: IJ, instructional materials; IJL, library materials selection and adoption; KEC, challenged materials policy; and IBM, teaching about controversial issues. The public will not have an opportunity to participate in today's work session to provide public comment because this is not a regularly scheduled school board meeting. No action will be taken, and there'll be no pre-agenda public comment period. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to begin this meeting with a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll invite you to join me if you wish. And now for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I want to remind the public, anybody who might be tuned in, that board members will not be monitoring their computers, so they won't be looking for emails or any social media communications. So if you're trying to reach us, best time to do that is either before or after meetings. And I want to remind anybody who is speaking, and that would be our staff today, to speak directly into your microphone so that we can hear you, and our viewers on Orange TV or YouTube can hear you as well. And now I will turn to Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a work session to have our first joint discussion and public discussion regarding policy IJ, IJL, KEC, and IMB. Because so many things are still unclarified by the Department of Education, I don't assume that this will be our only work session, but it is certainly our first. By the time we get to the end of our discussion, there are just a few things that we will have to contemplate as we get closer to the start of school, and media specialists and others needing to deal with some questions. We'll raise those at the end. But as a beginning, I know individual discussions have been held with board members. We'd like to hear more discussion from you and interaction as we try to come to some consensus. Again, my prediction is it won't be the only work session to get all of these matters discussed thoroughly, as we suspect as soon as we have some conclusion, there might be further direction from the state. Find it also a bit concerning that the state has essentially, Department of Education has essentially said the training for our media specialists and others who would need to review instructional materials will take place in January. They've always said January. School starts in August, and so we just have some things that are in flux that are a bit of a concern to us. We'll have more discussion around that. And with that wonderful introduction, I will hand it over to Rob Bixler to get us started.
Good morning, Chair Jacobs, board members, and Superintendent Jenkins. Today's work session again will be on policies IJ, IJL, IMB, and KEC. We will just, for the agenda, we'll be talking about the timeline, the summary of actions, the proposed revisions, next steps, and then questions and discussions. With a tentative schedule, Dr. Jenkins asked that cabinet members provide us feedback on the policies and the presentation by yesterday. Today, obviously, July 12th is the work session. We'll have the rule development workshop to be determined, along with board approval to be determined, and the effective date would be upon approval. Today, we'll be reviewing IJL, which is instructional resources and materials, IJL, library materials selection and adoption, IMB, which is teaching about controversial issues, and KEC, the challenged materials policy. And as we did in our one-on-ones with you, we're going to go directly to the red line, and we appreciate you allowing us to kind of pilot that method. We really appreciated that. It was great feedback for us. And Allison Kibbe will walk us through, and as you have questions or comments, we will take notes.
Good morning. I will begin with the IJ Instructional Resources and Materials Policy. So the purpose for bringing this to you today is that policy IJ is being revised to include language from recently enacted laws and to clarify the process by which a parent or resident of the county can object to the board's adoption of instructional materials. Overall, the revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. I'm just going to switch over. All right, so you should have all been provided with the red line copy of School Board Policy IJ. One of the things that I wanted to note first is that we are proposing a new name for this policy: Instructional Materials Program Selection and Objections. The policy is broken up into multiple sections, and it starts with the allocation of instructional materials, which essentially just states that we are equitably distributing our instructional materials among our schools, and there were no changes made to this section. The next section is about the selection of instructional materials, which includes multiple subsections. The changes made were to mirror language that was enacted as part of House Bill 1467, and where you see comments, we tried to make sure that that we quoted directly from that bill, so you'll see that throughout. Section 1 begins with the selection of instructional materials, which focuses on how the district follows the state process for adopting instructional materials and what our duties and responsibilities include. Continuing on page 2, Section 2 includes the district adopted instructional materials process. This is the process that we have written in our policy in the event that we would need to implement an off-cycle adoption or an adoption not on the commissioner's schedule for adopting instructional materials. Wanted to note one significant change. If you look at item 2BI, the selection of review committee members must now include one or more parents or legal guardians of a child enrolled in a district public school. That is a significant change, and that would be something that we would implement overall with any of our adoption processes. Continuing to the next section, you'll see a lot of red lines here, and these were absorbed in other areas of the policy overall to streamline. The next section of the policy is Section 3, Evaluation of Instructional Materials State Adopted and District Adopted. This states what the board is responsible for in terms of evaluating the instructional materials that we use and how we evaluate those against the standards and additional criteria as set forth in state statutes. You will notice here that the materials on the following page must be free of pornography, as in accordance with section 847.012 and 847.001 of Florida statutes.
Could I jump in right there?
Please.
Madam Chair, just want to let you know, we had, in our individual meetings with school board members, we had, a lot of you had asked what the definition of pornography is, and there isn't one. So we have created one on our own that is as broad as we can possibly do, but as narrow as we possibly could do. And I don't know, Mr. Palmerini looks like he might be wanting to add to that statement.
Can I interrupt
Yes.
beforehand? Because on the subject of the definition, there is a definition of child pornography. And it seems to me that the logical definition of pornography should mirror the definition of child pornography, except for taking out the fact that it would be a minor.
We looked
Is
at that. Mhm.
Is that the direction that y'all are going?
That's what we looked at to start
Okay,
with
great.
our definition, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Palmerini?
Yeah, so the definition of pornography as defined in the case law is, there's not really one, but the quote is, they know it when they see it, which becomes very, very difficult to translate into language here. But we did borrow the definition of child pornography. The one thing I would say is the United States Supreme Court's case law has said obscenity is not protected, but pornography as a general rule is, unless it involves minors, so that really takes care of us. So there's not a lot of clarity on those definitions from the Supreme Court. So we tried to fashion it as best we could based upon the definitions that we saw in there. We used child pornography as a baseline.
And so your definition is where?
It says any instructional material containing pornography or otherwise prohibited by Section 847.012 Florida statutes may not be used or made available within any district school. For purposes of this policy, pornography is defined as any depiction, written narrative, or graphic of any person engaged in sexual conduct, as that term is defined in Section 847.001, subsection 16 Florida statutes. For purposes of this policy, obscene shall have the same definition as that term is defined in Section 847.001, subsection 10 of the Florida statutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pardon me? Do we have a question? Member Gallo, I'll go to you in just a minute. Member Castellano, did you have a question?
Yeah, where it says any person engaged in sexual conduct, as that term is defined, is that term defined? Do we have to go look that up, or is that included? Palmerini.
Mr. Palmerini?
It's not actually in the policy, but I've got the statute pulled up. Sexual conduct is defined in that Florida statute. I could read it off for you here if you would care or not.
I think that's important to know. That's pretty broad.
It is a broad definition. Mr. Palmerini?
Sexual conduct means actual or simulated sexual intercourse, deviant sexual intercourse, sexual bestiality, masturbation, or sadomasochistic abuse, actual lewd exhibition of the genitals, actual physical contact with a person's unclothed or clothed genitals, pubic area, buttocks, or if such person is a female, breast, with the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of either party, or any act or conduct which constitutes sexual battery or simulates the sexual battery is being or will be committed. A mother's breastfeeding of her baby does not, under any circumstances, constitute sexual conduct.
Member Gallo?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Palmerini. I think that helped clarify my question. My question was going to be that we have AP courses that have like a lot of classics. And have we looked at this definition as it's applied to some of the required reading in our AP classes or our dual enrollment classes to see if any of that could be now objectified or not allowed and therefore cause problems in our AP classes?
We are currently working with other districts to see how they're going to handle AP courses, IB, ACE, dual enrollment, because those are, while technically they're K-12, they are high school courses. So does this law apply to the college courses because they're in high school? So we're working with other districts surrounding us to see how they're going to monitor this as well and handle this. So we'll come back to you with an answer on that one.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Dr. Jenkins?
I would add to what Mr. Bixler just shared, just two notes. One, AP courses are voluntary, and College Board has already issued a statement that they will not be changing their curriculum based on any state legislation. It would just be a matter of choice on whether or not individuals were interested in their children taking those classes. Where it ends up from those two opposing viewpoints remains to be seen, but I think College Board has been very clear that they are not going to adjust their national curriculum for any state that might have some restrictions, and that it is a choice for our parents if they want their students to take those college-level courses. We will continue to monitor.
So, Dr. Jenkins, I would ask if you would reach out to the Department of Ed and find out if we can get a written clarification from them on how they stand on AP courses if they have material that violates our policy. Are they in some way exempt? Do you have an answer to that, Mr.
Well,
Bixler?
part of this is you take those courses to get Bright Futures, which is approved by the state. So we're trying to find
Right.
exactly what you said. You know, your
The contradiction.
course is correct.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll try to get
Yeah.
something in.
Yeah, try to get something in writing.
We'll try to get something in writing.
Yes, well, we will appreciate you trying.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the second question I had for Mr. Palmerini, so when we talk about pornography, does this also exclude pornography in library materials?
The answer is yes.
Okay. And I know we're on instructional now. I do want to come back to the concerns that I know I had and several board members had about one book that was brought to our attention, because what I saw in there was clearly by the definition of the state, if you use the definition pornography that we're adopting, although we don't know that those were children depicted in that book, but it was clearly pornography. And so we'll get to library materials and that process a little while later.
And we
but I
have the
just-
same definition in policy IJL.
We will?
The same definition is in
Okay.
there, yes.
Okay, great. Member Colbert.
I think you asked my question, Chair, that it's critical that we get direction from the state.
Okay.
Because if we enact this in policy and we have those books, then we're clearly in violation of statute and policy, even though it's College Board. This is what's inside our district. So you did ask the question and answered, but that written direction is critical. Thank you.
And quickly, actually, when I think about it, your school year is starting very soon, so. Okay. Member Lopez.
So that means that, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to think about so many things. So that means that we have to avoid to teach our students any type of art piece or literature piece that are related. Let's say, even in medieval ages, we have poems that are related to this type of topic. So that means that we're gonna take away a lot of pieces from art, from literature, from, I don't know, I'm just asking, and even biology, because, I don't know, I need more explanation about and examples, concrete examples. For example, poetry, paint, art pieces. I'm thinking about Michelangelo. That means that we cannot teach Michelangelo anymore. I don't know, maybe Dali. I'm thinking about even AP literature and art, and I'm just having this question. How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to get rid of those pieces when we're teaching, and how it works? I don't know. Who's going to answer that question? I'm sorry.
Mr. Bickelshire, Dr. Jenkins.
So you pose critical questions, all of which we cannot answer exactly at this point. I'm looking at Mr. Palmerini because the definition of pornography would not be something as beautiful as David. The statue of David, I don't believe would fall into that category, but I'm not counting anything by my opinion. Mr. Palmerini?
So in my reading of the statute, I don't think it would cover things like that, because if you look at the definition of sexual conduct, it says with the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of either party. So I don't think just a depiction of a nude male body or a nude female body in and of itself would meet that definition. I don't think that it was meant to eliminate the teaching of the classics. Now, this is going to be case by case. Michelangelo's David is one case, but if there's literature, you'd have to look at it specifically to see if it meets the definition. But I don't think this was intended to keep the classics out of being taught.
Okay, thank you.
And I think it will be easier when the board has the language right in front of you, because it does talk about the depiction of of the body, it also talks about in relationship to sexual conduct. So I'm not saying it's completely clear, but it's a little clearer when reading it than it is just hearing it read to you once. But one last question on this. This language was already in the statute, correct? Mr. Palmerini?
It's very hard to keep these straight with all the changes that have been made, but I believe the answer is yes. The prohibition against pornography was already in the statute prior to the change.
That's what I thought. And so was the definition of pornography before these changes. So it's timely that we are visiting this right now.
The definition of child pornography, not the statute.
I am so sorry.
Yeah.
I stand corrected. There is no definition of pornography, only child pornography. Thank you. Member Cobert?
All right, how does this relate to when we teach health and reproduction in certain grades? I think, what is it, like 5th and 8th, when we, and with permission from parents, teach that? How does that pertain to this?
Well, it's part of the required instruction we have to do. We have to fill out a form every year and send that in that we're going to be teaching that. So again, those contradictions, we'll have to work through those as well.
That's a contradiction.
But the statute clearly provides for that.
Correct.
And it's a good point, because the statute carves that out and provides for that. And we don't have that in this policy. So perhaps we need to incorporate it. Mr. Palmerini, you want to comment on that?
What Rob said, that's exactly right. The statutes specifically require the teaching of that. So the more specific statute controls over the more general statute, and the more specific statute in this case requires us to teach human sexuality in those grades.
We might still just want to revisit. I don't remember the exact sentence and where it is, but there is a sentence in the statutes that does carve out health-related instruction.
Well, we might want to bring that to the state's attention.
Yeah, but now I'm saying if it's already included in theirs, then maybe we want a sentence in here.
Right.
So that somebody reading this doesn't have to know that there's a statute that prevails.
Or challenge that we're required to teach that.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
We should spell it out. Okay, thank you. Member Felder. Thank you, Member Cobert.
Thank you, Chair. This is indeed a very interesting conversation we're having up here. I'm just thinking of that enthusiastic British literature teacher like myself who teaches John Donne, or to his core, his mistress, off with that girdle. You'll have to explain to your students the metaphor. And so, again, I think we've been deliberating about trying to get the language back again, but I don't want any British literature teacher to feel any kind of way about teaching beautiful literature. The metaphor that you find in Baroque literature is just phenomenal. And you have to explain, because some of the vocabulary that our writers use, John Donne is very difficult, and you're going to have to really explain. And a lot of the poetry is promiscuous. It is. That's what it is. So we do indeed. I see ourselves almost in a conundrum as a board trying to follow policy, and I'm just hoping that whoever's making these policies, that they have clearly looked at it academically, what we're doing. And I'm not even talking about if a teacher needs to show a film to try to elaborate on whatever the book that they're reading, like Schindler's List, everybody's naked, okay? So I'm a start. So I'm hoping, board, that we do, Mr. Palmerini, that we do find some answers to give us clarity. You know, we need to have clarity, because we start school August 10th, and most of your teachers already have started their plan and setting up, because they're coming in running. You know, we're a third year out of the pandemic, so they're ready to go. And your AP classes, so I'm hoping that I don't want to have to experience a teacher being reprimanded or given a directive because they're trying to explain a piece of literature that somebody who hasn't read it thinks that it's pornography. I just wanted to add that as a person of the arts, that's very important to me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Dr. Jenkins.
So, General Counsel and I were just thinking of other potential examples, and so I'll just raise it, not that I have the answer, but I recall middle school reading assignment book called The Kite Runner,
Oh, yeah.
and there is
We taught that.
male-on-male sexual assault, actually depicted, not graphically described, but certainly depicted in that particular book. So I'm wondering, Mr. Palmerini, if that would be something that typically might need to be removed based on the statute, in your opinion. I know we haven't gotten a list in any specific direction, but Kite Runner comes to mind because my son was a middle schooler when that assignment was given. I'd read the book before, and so I was very intrigued about how to describe it to him as he went through that. Would that be something that's an example that might be questionable?
The answer is maybe. I would feel more comfortable if we have that kind of material that we inform parents, hey, this is the book, this is the type of material that's in it, and, maybe have an alternative assignment ready in that case. There's just such uncertainty with this new legislation coming down and how it's going to be applied, including with the existing provisions.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm hesitant to say, yes, go ahead and have the book. I just think if we're going to do something like that, we probably should have parental permission for them to read it before they do it, because I can't give you an answer that says the state wouldn't come in and say, no, that contains pornographic material in it.
Be quite convenient if they gave us a list of what is prohibited, but I don't know that that's going to happen either. Thank you, Mr. Palmerini.
Dr. Jenkins, for clarification, do you mean a list of books or a definition?
No, prohibited books.
Books, yeah, that would really be very helpful. Member Felder? Oh, I'm sorry, you already spoke. Member Casterdental? Yes, that's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This discussion, I'm glad that the board is kind of really discussing what falls under this category, but it scares me when we're asking for a list of books from the department that are banned or not appropriate without our own kind of process for reviewing them. I'd rather not invite them to ban books for us, but I understand your caution. I don't want to have Mr. Palmerini read that statute again, but if you don't mind sending us that language.
Already done.
You already sent it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I do think it would be helpful, and maybe there's some other more thought involved, but helpful to include that definition in the policy so that those people who are looking up the policy or having to abide by it can navigate their way through this content. If they're a teacher, I think it'd be important for them to be fully aware of how to navigate, because this is a tricky and vague area. So just a thought. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Dr. Jenkins?
So two things come to mind. First, let me say Kite Runner was an excellent book. I don't want anyone to think I'm critiquing that. Certainly wouldn't ask that it be put on any kind of banned list. More importantly, our teachers and our principals are concerned. If they are going to come under scrutiny or under some kind of liability, I think they want clear instruction. Some may not be as concerned and will assert their liberties as a teacher, but I will tell you, principals and teachers would like some clear answers. And so I don't want a list of banned books. I don't want to be on the verge of what feels like book burning. I understand some districts have just done away with classroom libraries altogether. I think that's just going way out on an extreme. But I do have to say, on behalf of our teachers and principals, they would like to know ahead of time rather than be the test case who has some kind of punitive response from the state. And so as much as we can give them clear direction, or the state is willing to give us clear direction, just tell us the rules, and then people can at least knowingly decide how they're going to proceed. But our teachers and our principals would like to have answers, and the statute seems to place some huge responsibility at the school level. That's my point of having clear direction.
Thank you. I concur. Member Byrd?
Thank you. Excuse me, I completely agree with what the superintendent just said, and I feel like this, along with other statutes that have been thrown upon us, have left so much ambiguity that, as you said, staff members are so nervous and administrators are so nervous that I feel like it's our responsibility as a board to not just keep saying we need to wait, because school is going to start in August. And I feel like we owe it to them to give them that guidance, like what you said. And I realize that it's hard for us to do, but when you look at what we have proposed here in our policy, and you look at the definition in 847001 of the statute, those definitions are pretty, they're very clear and laid out. So maybe even if it's just giving those to teachers, and as you said, Dr. Jenkins, some are going to be wanting to, use their liberties as a teacher because they believe passionately in what they teach, and until they're told by the state, until we are given guidelines that say, no, you can't, they may want to do that, but some are going to be more nervous. And I think that we really do have to start the school year off with clear guidance. Even if it's not given from the state, we have to do it for our teachers, because if we don't, it's just not fair to them as educators. And that's our job as board members, to create policy. And I know we have to abide by law, but in some cases there are policies we create where there aren't laws, but they are things that boards have believed in and have done. And I think until we're given clear guidance, I think we're going to have to take that leap and give some better direction to our staff. So.
Thank you, Member Byrd. Let me, Dr. Jenkins, did you want to respond to that? No, that was for Pam. That was for Pam. Okay, let me go to Member Gould, and then I'll come back. Member Gould?
Thank you, and thank you for this discussion about this very difficult process to implement, because it is still muddy. Since the intent is parents' ability to determine what their kids see, is there, I know there's a mechanism for that review and sign off, but on books that may be determined age appropriate, that may have may not be as clear on which way they would go under the definition and the statute, is there a mechanism for the teacher to have that classroom of parents sign off on the review of that book at that level at that time?
Dr. Jenkins?
We can certainly include that in policy. That might be the safest way to proceed. If books have questionable content and we're not clear on it, that the parents have a choice to opt for something different. That provision is certainly already available, probably not used as often as we may be using it in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if we look at what we hope the spirit of the law is to give parents that ability. I, as a parent, wanted my children at an age-appropriate level to understand the world that we live in at that point in time. But I had friends who were not ready to necessarily share what I would share with my children. So if we put that back in the parents' hands and take that burden off of the teachers, the principals, the media specialists, if there is a particular book that they think is very worth reviewing, or art, or, all the things that my fellow board members listed, that then that parent would have that option at any time. I know it's a difficult thing to probably implement, but maybe it's just made available with a curriculum review on Canvas. I don't know, with the work that's coming up that week. But anyway, you all will figure that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gould. The last comment I want to make on this, I understand that teachers and principals are obviously concerned and wanting some clarity. I do want to point out that this board, I think, shares that same concern, except that in many ways we lack the control, but we own the responsibility. And it's one of the most frustrating things I've seen about this governance model is to have responsibility for something you have no control over. So when it comes to instructional material, there's a little bit more control. When it comes to library material, I will tell you, I feel that with 205 libraries, and any assurance that there's no pornography in our libraries went out the window for me when the gentleman showed up with Genderqueer. Because while that book has value, it has pornography. So I think regardless how we might personally feel about things, I think we have to take very seriously what's in the law. And when it's clear, we need to abide by it. And I think in this case it is. So we'll move on.
Thank you. All right, so the adoption of instructional materials section outlines who is responsible for facilitating the adoption of our instructional materials or textbooks, and then also the process. I want to note that there is a new requirement as part of the laws for public meetings of committees. This is new. Meetings of committees convened for the purpose of ranking, eliminating, or selecting instructional materials for recommendation to the board must be noticed and open to the public. The process then continues, as it always has, with public access of recommended materials, which we must provide 20 calendar days before the board hearing and public meeting. And then followed by public notice of materials considered for adoption, followed by the public hearing and the public meeting, which may not occur at the same time. The next section.
Can I interrupt just for 1
yes,
minute
absolutely.
To get clarification? When you say open to the public, you mean open for the public to witness, or you mean open for the public to provide input?
Open to the public to witness, the way that the language is written.
Okay, thank you.
Section 5, the purchase of instructional materials, is on the next page and outlines how and when instructional materials are purchased. Note that the district must maintain on its website a current list of instructional materials by grade level purchased by the district. This is something that we are already doing. In addition, in the next section, access to instructional materials, we have to provide that in a searchable format, and we must include the instructional materials that are provided through the required instruction. Section 7 of the policy focuses on the use of instructional materials, essentially stating that principals must communicate with parents and legal guardians how the instructional materials are to be used at the appropriate grade levels. to implement the standards. Section 8 deals with lost and damaged instructional materials, which continues on the next section, and outlines how a principal may collect fees from students or students, parents, or legal guardians for any materials that have been lost, destroyed, or unnecessarily damaged. Okay, the next section, Section 9, talks about the objections to supplemental instructional materials already in use. And then I want to point out that the next section is about objections to instructional materials selected for adoption. So those are two different processes, and you will learn more about the objections to supplemental instructional materials already in use in School Board Policy IJL, so we'll talk about that at that point. For objections to instructional materials, we decided to include this in this section based on language in the new laws and statutes, and wanted to clarify the difference between objecting to an instructional material versus objecting to a library or other reading material. So the individuals who may file an objection to the adoption of a specific instructional material are parents or legal guardians of a public student in the district or a resident of the county. Any objection to the selection of any instructional material shall be filed and processed as followed. A parent or legal guardian may file a petition for objection to instructional materials adopted by the school board utilizing the form available and posted on the district's instructional materials information website within 30 calendar days after the board's adoption of specific instructional materials. So this provides an opportunity for the public to object to the materials after the board has already selected the materials at the last public meeting. After that, the process establishes some timelines. So within 30 calendar days after that 30 calendar day period to file a petition has expired, the board shall conduct a public hearing on all petitions timely received before an unbiased and qualified hearing officer. The hearing officer may not be an employee or agent of the school district. The hearing is not subject to the provisions of Chapter 120 Florida statutes. However, the hearing must provide sufficient procedural protections to allow each petitioner an adequate and fair opportunity to be heard and present evidence to the hearing officer. Within 30 days after the board receives the hearing officer's findings and recommendation, the board at a public meeting will consider the petition, the hearing officer's findings and recommendation, and any evidence presented to the hearing officer and make a final decision on the petition. The decision of the board after conducting the hearing is final and is not subject to appeal. This entire section mirrors language in the law. Okay, the next section is about the use of instructional materials allocation. We made hardly any changes to this section, and this very much so mirrors the language in the state statutes. The sale of instructional materials, we made some minor changes here, just stating that if the principal, upon request of the parent or legal guardian of a student in the school, shall sell to the parent or legal guardian any physical copies of textbooks used in the school, and textbooks shall not be sold to parents or legal guardians at a profit. Again, all of this mirrors statutory language. And those are all the changes for School Board Policy IJ for instructional materials.
All right, thank you. We have no further comments from the board at this time.
Okay. The next item that is associated with School Board Policy IJ is the petition for objection to instructional materials adopted by the school board. So this is the form that a parent, legal guardian, or resident may submit if they would like to object to the instructional materials. This form is newly developed, so it's still in draft form, and we can obviously make changes based on your input. So the first page kind of includes directions at the top that mirror the language in the school board policy, and then include some of the critical contact information that we would need from the person submitting the form, as well as the student's information, if applicable. On the next page, there's certain information that we of course need, including information about the adopted or instructional materials that they are objecting to. And then they have specific questions that they must answer, like, to what do you object? And what is your objection? Did you examine this material? Yes or no?
No comments, sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, school board policy IJL. School board policy IJL has also been renamed to library materials program selection and challenges. You will notice that we absorbed the challenges procedures for library media materials into this school board policy, which is why we're trying to repeal school board policy KEC. So you'll see the challenge process outlined within this policy. The selection of library media materials and other reading materials section begins with the objectives of our selection. Generally, what is the purpose of why we have a media center program, and what are we trying to accomplish? We made very minor changes just to mirror the language in House Bill 1467 right there at the top. The responsibility and training for selection of materials underwent significant changes due to language in the law. So educational materials shall be selected by district personnel who hold a valid educational media specialist certificate. This was not previously included in the law. In addition, principals are responsible for overseeing compliance with school district procedures for selecting school library media center materials at the school to which they are assigned. Again, this was not previously included in the law. Media specialists and any other personnel involved in the selection of school library material shall complete the Florida Department of Education's online training program to assist reviewers in complying with the requirements of Section 1006.31 Florida statutes before reviewing and selecting age-appropriate materials and library resources. Prior to such training becoming available, media specialists and any other personnel involved in the selection of school library material shall consider the requirements contained in Sections 1006.28, 1006.283, 1006.31, and 1006.40 Florida statutes. This is the training that Dr. Jenkins was talking about that won't be available until January. The superintendent shall annually verify that all media specialists employed by the district have completed the Department of Education's online training program. The next section continues with criteria and procedures for selection of library materials and other reading materials. This section also underwent significant changes. You will notice here that the standards to determine the propriety of library materials and other reading materials shall be in accordance with Section 1006.40 of the Florida statute, specifically that the material is free of pornography and material prohibited under Section 847.012 Florida statutes. For purposes of this policy, pornography is defined as any depiction, written, narrative, or graphic of any person engaged in sexual conduct as that term is defined in Section 847.001 Florida statutes. For purposes of this policy, obscene shall have the same definition as that term is defined in Section 847.001 Florida statutes. So we mirrored the language that we used in School Board Policy IJ as it applies to instructional materials here as it applies to library materials. In addition, library materials must be suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material presented and appropriate for the grade level and age group for which the materials are used or made available. Item 3B, books, papers, or utterances of a sectarian, religious, or denominational character shall only be included in the collection for instructional purposes when related to an objective study of the Bible and of religion. This is a sentence from School Board Policy IMB, so we absorbed that policy, which is why we are recommending the repeal of School Board Policy IMB. Section C outlines what a media specialist shall do when selecting materials for the purpose of including them in the collection, including evaluating the existing collection, consulting reputable, professionally recognized reviewing periodicals, and school community stakeholders. The school community stakeholders piece is new in the law. Consider materials based on reader interest, consider materials that support the state academic standards and align curriculum, and consider materials that support the academic needs of students and faculty. Materials shall be considered on the basis of overall purpose, timeliness, importance of the subject matter, quality of the writing production, readability, authoritativeness, reputation of the publisher and producer, reputation and significance of the author, artist, composer, producer, format, and price. The last item changed significantly as well and applies to donated educational materials. So donated or otherwise made available educational materials shall be accepted with the understanding that their inclusion in the collection shall be determined by the district personnel who hold a valid educational media specialist certificate in accordance with the same selection criteria and procedures as purchased materials. Section 4 is entirely new, criteria for removal of library materials and other reading materials. This was also based on language in the new laws. So materials shall be evaluated and considered for removal from collections on a regular basis. At minimum, materials shall be considered for removal based on the following criteria: the physical condition, the rate of recent circulation, lack of alignment to state academic standards and relevancy to curriculum, out-of-date content, or removed as a result of a formal challenge. Materials maintained in the Media Center. This section is also entirely new. Each school shall publish on its website a link to the searchable library catalog, which shall list all materials maintained in the Media Center, and this is something that we have already been doing for quite some time. Each school shall publish on its website a list of all materials required as part of a school or grade level reading list.
Please, Member Casterdental, and then I'll go into Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I go back to the criteria and procedures for selection of library reading materials? It's 3B, right there. Books, papers, or utterances of a sectarian, religious, or denominational character shall only be included in the collection for instructional purposes when related to an objective study of the Bible and of religion. Does that mean that if there's a character in a book that is of a religion, that's part of the character's development, that they can't be, we can't have that book because it's not an objective study of the Bible or religion?
Mr. Palmerini.
Mr. Palmerini.
Madam Chair, we're looking to John, who's shaking
Yeah.
his head no.
No,
I don't think that's what the statute was meant to do. What this statute, 1345, is a statute that talks about if you had a class of comparative religion. So we have to allow that as far as under the statute. I don't think that if the talking about a character's religious development as like a character development aspect of the book, I don't think that that's what this statute is intended to prohibit.
Okay, so what if they're saying that there's a problem when it's in instructional purposes? What if it is a study of Gandhi, but it's not the study of his religion, or but he does quote some religious underpinnings? Is that not allowed?
I don't think that's what the statute was designed to prohibit. It's designed to ensure that we're not indoctrinating students into one particular religion or another, but having a historical survey of somebody like Gandhi and his religious philosophies, I don't think that that's what this is intended to prohibit.
When they say books, papers, or utterances, that seems pretty limiting. I don't know. I understand it's statutory, but that to me is rather confusing.
Books, papers, or utterances came from the previous version of our policy. IMB. And so that could be we could probably just track the statutory language explicitly. The statutory language just says the district school board may install in the public schools in the district a secular program of education, including but not limited to an objective study of the Bible and of religion. We could probably hew more closely to that if we wanted to rework the language.
Okay, I just, there's a lot of historical figures that we study that have religious utterances or that are guided by their religion that are fully about the character, the essence of the character, without the study of the religion or the Bible. I just think that that's, maybe some clarity would help. I mean, we can't read about the Pope.
No, that's not what this was intended to do. We can certainly rework that provision to make it more clear that this was designed to prevent the indoctrination of one religious practice versus the other.
Yeah, I'm not sure it does that. I think it's confusing to me and could be to others. I don't know if anyone even pays attention to that little section of this, but it doesn't seem very clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Byrd. Thank you, Member Castro-Dental. Member Byrd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. The section on donated materials, is that what would include classroom teachers' personal libraries, reading libraries in their classrooms?
It didn't explicitly state that.
Not specifically. Do we have that indicated anywhere in here? I'm trying to figure out if teachers' personal classroom libraries have to be curated now by media specialists.
The House bill did not mention classroom libraries.
Okay. Okay. And just kind of a formatting thing at the very end of the policy when you talk about, hold on, where is it? Oh, I went way too far. You talk about media centers at the very last thing that you talked about, and I'm trying to find
Materials maintained in media centers,
Yes.
Section 5.
Yes, materials maintained in media centers. We changed referring to it as media centers, didn't we, in the beginning? Didn't we change media to library collections, or I don't know if we did or not. I thought we did at the beginning of the policy, so I was just wondering why it says media centers again.
Make a note of that, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
library
Yeah.
media materials.
Yes. I've circled that one.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, Vice Chair, your suggestion is we just have consistency throughout if we're going to use one term or the other? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, excellent point.
Thank you.
Which term are we going to use? Media centers or libraries?
They're referred to as media centers in the district.
Okay. Let's move on then.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, hang on.
One more thing. And I just want to kind of, I guess, reiterate what was said. Case by case, when John Palmerini talked about, everything is so specific here, and Member Castellano talked about if you're teaching about Gandhi. If you teach about Martin Luther King, you're going to have to talk about his religion, because that was the essence of his speeches and what he talked about. So that I guess the teacher or instructor would not have to feel, intimidated by the statute. It'll have to just be a case by case, because every teacher, a history teacher that goes through the civil rights movement, they're going to talk about either I Have a Dream or at least one of Martin Luther King's sermons. And you have to talk about what that means. And it reflects his religious beliefs. So I guess we have to just work it on a case by case, right?
Well, I think that the language that Mr. Palmerini is going to suggest we put in is going to resolve a lot of that. Mr. Palmerini?
Yeah, it will, number one. Number two, I also think, again, we're not trying to divorce the historical bases of these folks in history as far as what brought them to where they were and why they did what they did. And, Dr. Martin Luther King was obviously had religious bases for, the things that he was doing. I don't think that you can certainly talk about that. It's the next step of, and he said this and he said this, and this is what I think you should follow. It's trying to prevent indoctrination. I think you can talk historically what the basis of his positions were. I think that's perfectly fine. I think when you start saying his positions were X and you should believe X, that becomes more problematic under the statute. It's an objective study of the Bible and of religion. You want to talk about objectively. Yes, he was a pastor, and a lot of his positions derived from what his religious beliefs were. But as to saying his religious beliefs are superior to somebody else's, I think that's going to be the problematic portion.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Dr. Jenkins.
It just occurred to me, because the intent is to avoid indoctrination, then perhaps that's the actual terminology that we put in the policy, that historical, informational can be shared, and that we avoid any kind of indoctrination. That might just make it clear for everyone.
I like it too.
I like that.
All right.
Okay, so the next part of the policy deals with challenges to library materials and other reading materials, and this would take the place of School Board Policy KEC. So the following procedures shall be followed when the appropriateness of books or materials other than state-adopted textbooks in use in the classroom or school library is questioned. A parent or legal guardian or resident of the county may file a request for reconsideration, which is different from the petition to objection for instructional materials. Challenged material shall not be removed immediately. Such material shall be available for student use pending a final decision. Notwithstanding the foregoing, the superintendent or designee may remove materials during the pendency of a request for reconsideration if the superintendent or designee believes it will be disruptive to allow the material to remain available. The process now begins with an informal request for reconsideration of instructional materials and library materials. Specifically with the person who is concerned, I'm just going to refer to them as a parent, the parent reaching out to the principal in writing, requesting a conference to discuss the use of the material. The principal would then have 10 working days after receiving the request to schedule a conference. The goal of that conference is to come to a resolution. If the concern is not resolved during that conference, the principal would explain the rest of the challenge process to the parent and would then provide the parent with the request for reconsideration form, which they would then be able to file. They would have 10 days after that conference to file that written request for reconsideration. If they do not file within the 10 days, that would be considered a waiver of any further request for review. If the request for reconsideration is filed in a timely manner, within the 10 days, it would need to include the following information, and I will show you the form in just a moment. So that you guys can kind of see it in context. So it would need to include the following information: the author, compiler, or editor, date of request for reconsideration, grade level if applicable, course if applicable, publisher title, specific reason for challenge, page number of each item challenged, and the signature and address of the parent or legal guardian or resident of the county requesting the reconsideration. You were all provided with the request for reconsideration of instructional materials or library media materials draft form. I have it pulled up here on the screen as well. So again, it provides directions to a parent, legal guardian, or resident who may be interested in a request for reconsideration and explains the general process. Includes an area for name of concern or name of school, and then what the material is that is being submitted for reconsideration. They have several different areas that they can fill out based on the Florida statutes if they have any concern specifically with that in mind, what brought the material to their attention, Did they examine the entirety of the material? If not, what parts did they examine? To what in the materials do you object? Please be specific. Cite pages, picture, film sequence, etc. What do you believe is a theme or purpose of the material? What do you feel might be the result of a student using this material? For what age group would you recommend this material? In your opinion, is there anything of value in this material? Have you read any critical reviews of this material? If so, what? Please be specific. What would you like the school to do about this material? And then we've given them some choices here. Do not assign it to my child. Withdraw it from all students. Other. If this material is withdrawn, what material of the same subject and format would you suggest as a substitute? And then the contact information for the parent, legal guardian, or resident is included below, as well as the signature line that's required.
Okay, let's pause here. I have two questions. I'll take the second one first because we're on the materials form. We're asking them to tell us what they would suggest that we replace it with. If they don't fill that out, that doesn't matter, right? Because I think that's likely. Huh? You like that? Well, I mean, you might like that. I just wouldn't want that to be, disqualifying question there. The other comment I had goes back to, I think it goes back to the part of the policy, I think it's under 2, where the superintendent or designee, tell me again, who is the designee? The term designee, how are we using that? Under...
It doesn't define it, just says
right
superintendent or designee.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the superintendent's designee. I understand, thank you. My question here is, the only reason that the superintendent or the designee can remove it immediately is if they think it's going to be disruptive. It seems to me that now that we're clear that that we have defined pornography in our policy and said it's not allowed in our library, that if it's brought to the superintendent's attention or somebody pulls it because it has pornography and the superintendent reviews it, or you review it, or somebody else does and says it has it, it would seem to me at that point that it should be pulled automatically because it's not allowed on our library shelves statutorily. And I don't think it should have to go through, it can go through a process, but I just don't think it sits on the shelves any longer than the moment that we find out it's there, if it's true pornography. Okay, so something that we could consider adding in as additional language. So, Member Castellano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there someone before me?
No, you're next, and then Member Byrd.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment on that same section about the superintendent's ability to remove material. I understand giving the superintendent that authority for sure, but I also think that it shouldn't just be dependent on whether it will be disruptive to allow the material to remain, because it could also be disruptive to withdraw the material. So just some more, I think, clarity that there is a balance to consider in whether you remove it or if it remains. The disruption could go either way. Thank you.
Vice Chair.
I agree with both of your points. Would it be possible to maybe just add the phrase, and I don't even know if this is something we want to do or not, but forgoing the superintendent in consultation with the school board could pull a book, so that way it's not just having the superintendent have free will to pull a book off a shelf if we don't agree with it or we think that that's not a good decision. Because, we obviously hear a lot from the community, all of us board members, so it might be valuable as the superintendent, our current superintendent would consult with us probably, but future superintendents may not. So is that something that we might want to consider.
Well, one thing.
might be helpful.
One thing to consider in that is, does that mean now we're going to have a public hearing to pull something? And what I was referring to is something that is clearly meets the definition of pornography as we have it in our policy, as it is in statute, which should never have made it on the shelves in the first place. And for us to have to go through the process of a public hearing to debate it, I would prefer us not be in that position if it's.
I was not thinking public. I was thinking how, private.
Private conversations. I'm sorry.
Conversations, like how she normally would call each of us or talk to each of us individually. But I don't know if that's even something that
and then
is
the other
necessary.
concern, the other concern I always have also with the superintendent going through a polling process is whether it circumvents the sunshine requirements.
Yes, that's true too.
So,
Madam Chair.
Yes, Dr. Jenkins.
So I would agree. I think there is some concern. What you don't want it to look like, Member Byrd, is that you're circumventing the actual process and that the board has made a decision before it ever comes to them. So this is just a preliminary action to keep peace and civility or to avoid any kind of disruption at the school site, as you would with any other issue, to preserve the educational atmosphere and order. I think if you try to say in consultation, it sends a message ahead of time that the board has also already made a determination before it's even gone through the process. So I think it would probably be a rare instance, and certainly the board being the employers or the supervisors of the superintendent can certainly individually make their concerns known. But if you put into policy that there's some consultation, it sounds like it reads like there is a polling or a decision made ahead of time. And if I'm the one bringing the protest, I might essentially say, well, the board's already indicated they made their decision before it ever started. And so I would think that would get a little bit sticky. And I want to be clear, I absolutely support that parents can have input on what they want their children to be exposed to. I just think we need to make it manageable at the school level so that everything doesn't end up being a board agenda item.
Concur. Member Castellano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When it states that the superintendent may remove the material, does that mean just for the school where it's being challenged, or is it district-wide? I would hope that it would just be the school, narrow.
That's how it was written, to be narrow.
Okay.
Wouldn't it depend on the nature of it? For instance, it's pornographic. Yeah. If the superintendent determines that, then we couldn't leave it on another shelf, on another school.
I agree. Once you put in policy that definition, then
Right.
it would be district-wide.
Go ahead, Member Castellano.
Sometimes it's not obvious, how it is, how easily it fits under that definition. So that's why there is that other step of the review process. So sounds like we don't even need a review process. It just goes to superintendent each time.
That's just a temporary. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. It's still a temporary step. It's just a question of if it strikes the superintendent that this is pornography and it shouldn't be there, then at that point it comes off all the shelves until it's determined whether it is or isn't. Otherwise, we have a legal problem with something being on our shelves that's not supposed to be there. I mean, you can still go through the process of it not being the superintendent's sole decision, but I think once you're made aware of something that violates the law and you do nothing, I think at that point, up until then, I think we could have a legal problem, to be honest with you. If there's a book on our shelves that has pornography in it, I think we have a legal problem. But I think we have a much greater problem when it's been brought to our attention and we say, well, it's going to sit there for another 10 days and then another period and another period. So that was the reason I felt like it's important if the superintendent believes that it is a clear case of pornography, that she has the authority to remove it during the process. Back to you, Member Castrodano.
I'm not sure that there are always, or that every situation is clear-cut if it's pornography. We're still debating what that means. Even though it's in statute, it isn't always obvious. So some of our works of literature may have a scene that depicts rape, but that's essential to the story, and is that pornography? Did we determine that's pornography?
I'm not disagreeing with you that it's not as clear cut as one might think. I'm really not disagreeing with you. I'm just thinking that if the superintendent has reviewed it and believes it is, that it would be prudent to have the authority for her to pull it off the shelves while it goes through the process. I know that's giving the superintendent a certain amount of latitude to make that what might be a subjective determination is what your concern is, which I understand completely.
I'm against pulling books off of the shelf. So any way that I can slow that process down to allow access to literature for students, I'm in favor of. So how long does this review process normally take with all of the different steps? How long could that process be? Or how short could it be?
To define some dates.
We
tried to define some dates within the policy to make it so we can have some benchmarks to make sure that the process goes smoother and quicker.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, let me go back to Vice Chair.
So maybe just adding the word temporarily in that might be helpful. Superintendent may temporarily remove material during, and then adding if or designee believes it will be disruptive or clearly violates law or something to that effect, to get your point in there. But I do understand Dr. Castrodano's concern as well. And I think that if we had, shorter timelines, that might be better. I know there's concerns that some books, that it has, taken a long time for some of the reviews. So I wanted to ask a question about the conference with the principal when a parent requests the very beginning of the process. If it doesn't really say how that can be resolved, but it says if it's not resolved, then the committee can be put together. But my question is, I'm assuming the intent of that is, they come to a agreement, the parent understands why that material was chosen, and then it's all good. But what happens if it's the other way, where the principal just says, okay, I agree with you, or the assistant principal, as it says in the policy, okay, I agree with you, I'm going to pull it from the shelves. Is that something we're allowing? Because that concerns me, because we have 205 different principals, and I don't want to see books being pulled maybe because a principal is intimidated a little by a parent maybe that comes in, and I know our principals are fantastic. I'm not saying they would be, but you never know. And so I have a little concern about that it's not clearly defined, that possibility that a principal could just side with a parent and pull book without committee.
And when you're, just for clarification, when you're talking about that first conversation with the principal, are you meaning that you're concerned that if it's the parent says, I don't want my child to have access, that's resolved, but if what you're concerned is, I don't want anybody to have access to it, and the principal goes, oh, I agree with you, I'm taking it off. That's what my concern is, yes. We can look at that. I understand your point. That's a very good point.
Okay. And then I just wanted to get a little clarification that you have two forms. This last form is for library, the objection of library materials. The other form from the instructional materials, those are for two different things, but can you pull up that
Yes.
The last
I
one?
think I know what you're going to say. It should just say library materials at
Thank
the
you.
top here.
It's
Yeah.
just a little confusing because
No.
I know when I pulled them both up, I was
You're
like,
good.
why are there two different ones? And what is this one for? And what's that one for? It's just a little confusing. So,
Absolutely. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
okay.
And we did try to combine them two into one form, but it made it more confusing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we thought it was better to put the state adopted version and then the materials separate.
That's a remnant of the combination that we forgot to remove. Sorry.
Yeah, and maybe if the other one, I don't know what the other one says, but if the other one says stated, what is that one?
Petition for
Adopted.
adoption to instructional materials adopted by the school
Okay,
board.
that's pretty clear though. Okay.
We'll definitely make that adjustment.
I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Felder?
Thank you, Chair. I remember when you all came with us individually, we went through this meticulously. My concern, again, with the principals or whomever is in charge, if there's a complaint from a parent or community member and the teacher is just left there and told, no, can't teach it. I have a real issue with that because I would probably be the teacher that would rebel. My concern is that eventually, though, even with the superintendent's, suggestion, because as she said, we don't ever want parents to feel like they don't have a stake in what we're teaching, but I really have a serious issue with a parent saying nobody should learn it. No, you don't have that right. But if you're concerned with your child, and I'm just giving my own personal experience. When I was teaching at Edgewater, I had a book. It's quite controversial, and it dealt with sodomy. But I had letters written. My principal told me I had to have letters, but I already knew it. But he said you have to send letters to the parents to give them opportunity to make a decision. Out of the last 6 or 7 years of teaching that book at Edgewater, 3 parents from the 6 or 7 years said no. But I gave them that benefit of the doubt, and then I also asked them, do you have, I can suggest another book, but do you have a suggestion? A lot of them may not, so I understand not putting them on that spot saying because they can't think of a book, then no, I gave them the option, do you have another book? And many of them said no. I said, well, I have a book, another book that you read. But ultimately, as a board, we're going to have to make decisions anyway on the policies, are we not? Do we not make those decisions? So allow them the access to deliberate and to discuss and agree and disagree, because it's going to come right back here, right? Just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Okay.
So I will continue under Section 4, the school level formal request for reconsideration, item B. So upon receipt of a timely request for reconsideration of instructional
I'm sorry,
materials.
can we hold up just a minute? I
course, sorry.
didn't see Member Lopez had pressed her button.
sorry.
Let's stop here before we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern is and every person can complain about a book or resource. If this person live in the county, they can be able to complain. So the process will be different, because if we have a parent complain, the parent is a parent conference, and how it's going to work with the resident, not being a parent, not how is the process to be followed?
The resident would also have to reach out in writing and request a conference with the principal regarding the book.
Okay. So after that, okay, how can we, because I heard that they have, they can provide an option after the complaint. But if this type of law allow vendors to do that, because if a vendor feel that, I don't like that book because my book is better and I want to make business with OCPS, so let me complain because I'm a resident of Orange County, blah, 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 that person can provide an option and might be not committed to the reality of the complaint. It's not committed with the students. It's just committed with his. How can we avoid that through this policy? Because I think that this is gonna be an easy way for a vendor.
So several things. Going back to the selection criteria, the school library media specialist would still have to select this person's book, and it would still need to meet the various selection criteria that we have established both in state statute and then just overall, does it meet the needs of the collection, does it meet the standards, does it meet the needs of the students. So it wouldn't be necessarily just so easy for a vendor to have their own personal agenda for filing a challenge. One additional area to consider is that we have a contract with approved vendors from whom we can purchase books. And so if this is a person who is perhaps self-publishing a book and they are not somebody that we can purchase from through a vendor, then that would not be a book that we would technically be able to purchase.
But to make a complaint, the person have more expertise than a resident, not knowing. I think that it's gonna be an easy way out anyways, by just analyzing the type of resource or material in the media center. I still think that the policy is not clear, on that matter.
Maybe we can work with Mr. Palmerini. I mean, I understand what you're saying, because if they're a resident and they happen to have a publishing company, could they file? I mean, technically, because of how it says, a parent, legal guardian, or a resident of the county. So to your point, I completely understand your point. Maybe we can work with Mr. Palmerini and how we can tweak that a little bit more.
Okay. And also, if the parent doesn't have any recommendation, are we gonna take that in consideration?
If they don't have a recommendation, it wouldn't be anything that disqualifies them. So we talked about that earlier. If they don't complete that, it's okay.
It's okay, they can.
It's okay. It wouldn't disqualify them.
And how, what are the rights of the rest of the students? Because maybe he's complaining because of a book in the library, but the rest of the students that the parents are not complaining for that resource, how is going to work?
One of the items on the request for reconsideration form asks the complainant, what would you like the school to do about this material? And gives them some options. Do not assign it to my child. Withdraw it from all students or other. So they may have some other ideas as well that they can contribute.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right, I gotta find my spot. Okay, so upon receipt of the request for reconsideration form, the principal would then convene the school literacy council, which must have an odd number of members but must include and shall not be limited to the following people: a certified educational media specialist, the principal, director, or assistant principal or assistant director, at least one teacher, excluding the teacher who may be involved, as selected by the principal or assistant principal director, and one parent or legal guardian or resident of the county, excluding the parent, legal guardian, or resident of the county requesting the reconsideration, as selected by the principal or assistant principal. At this point, the principal would also notify the appropriate area superintendent, associate superintendent, and/or chief of high schools. In preparation for its review, the School Literacy Council is going to receive a number of materials, including a copy of the request for reconsideration form, and then reviews from reputable, professionally recognized reviewing periodicals, which would be the periodicals that school librarians would have consulted when they were purchasing this title. The School Literacy Council shall meet to review the challenge material within 15 working days of receipt of the written request for reconsideration form. And then the School Literacy Council is required to meet in the sunshine, meaning that the meeting shall be open to the public and advertised at the school level. There must be quorum. when the School Literacy Council meets to make a decision regarding the challenge. School Literacy Council's responsibilities include reviewing and understanding the entire challenge material, then determining the extent the challenge material supports the curriculum, and weigh merits against alleged faults to form opinions based on the challenge material as a whole and not on passages isolated from the context unless the challenge material contains pornographic material and/or obscene material as defined herein. Maintain written minutes containing the start time, end time, location, and names and titles of council members. The written minutes shall be maintained in accordance with the Florida law. The School Literacy Council's ultimate goal is to issue a written determination, and in doing so, the School Literacy Council shall find either that the challenge material does not meet the criteria and or contains prohibited content under Section 1006.28 of the Florida statutes. If this is the case, the school shall discontinue the use of the challenge material for any grade level or age group for which such use is inappropriate or unsuitable, or that the challenge material does meet the criteria under Section 1006.28 of the Florida statutes. You'll notice here that we would like the school board's input on how long this determination shall be valid for. And I don't know if you guys want to discuss that now or if I should keep going. Keep going? Yes, ma'am.
Hang on a second. So you're saying if it's determined that it's prohibited, how long would it be valid for?
How long would the School Literacy Council's written determination be valid for?
I would think it would be valid. All right, I struggle with this because it just, it seems like once a decision's made that something is not permissible under the law, to say that 6 weeks later it's not that decision isn't valid doesn't make any sense. It would seem like there would have to be some process by which somebody would have to appeal that decision to reverse that decision. You're making a decision that something doesn't conform with the law. There's no sunset provision for that decision unless it's overturned by somebody.
Law changes.
Unless the law changes or there's some process by which it is overturned, but you can't just sunset that decision. I don't think.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Dr. Jenkins, you can tell I'm a little just caught off guard by the idea that we're maybe taking, regardless of what we think about some of the laws that are passed, the responsibility to follow the law when it is passed. And so I'm struggling a little bit with that part of some of our conversations here, but go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree, Madam Chair. I don't believe it's necessary to have a sunset provision because as long as the law is in place, it should stand. Perhaps we've seen some other districts have language in there around a duration. So perhaps over the period of a year or two, there is a challenge and the state somehow makes an adjustment to the statute. Well, once the statute changes, then your policy has to be changed to match the statute anyway. And so the notion of having a sunset or any language that says until such time that the statutes are adjusted or there's a ruling or there's some provision to overturn it, it is valid. I think it kind of goes without saying because if there's a change in statute, then your policy has to comply
One thing
anyway.
does occur to me that maybe what you were asking here is the determination might be that it's okay to put it back on the shelf, and could somebody then at
Challenge
another
again.
point challenge it again? And so is it valid for some period of time, or can somebody come in tomorrow and start it over again? And can you just have this revolving door of 100 people challenging the same book? So from that standpoint, there probably needs to be some period of time before it can be challenged again. But I think once a determination's been made that it's not permissible, then that decision would have to be overturned, or the statutory provision would have to have changed. So that's going to be tricky language, but that's kind of how I would see that. I think Member Castrodental's, Member Gallo? I'll take everybody in order, but I can tell Member Castellanos chomping.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had like two questions. My first one is, in the literary council, it states a parent and/or community member can be, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of different laws that pass. I thought there was something written in one of the laws that passed that said it had to be a parent. Like, that we had to put a parent on this council. It couldn't be an either or. So I just had a question regarding parent or legal guardian or resident of the county, because if we choose a resident of the county, then there's not a parent on this council.
It does have to be a parent there by statute.
So then I think that we need to remove or resident of the county. Or unless our intent was a parent, well, I guess if you're, well, no, you could be a Lake County resident, and we have open schools. So you could be a Lake County resident and still send your child to an Orange County school. So I didn't know if our intent was you just have to be a resident and a parent or guardian, or at any rate. If the bill says it has to be a parent, then we can't use a community member.
Okay, we're checking.
And then my next question is, and I understand that, I guess each book will probably be appointed a different teacher or instructor to kind of review for this literary council, because this, you have to read the book, and then you have to meet, like, this could take a lot of time out of a teacher's schedule. So will we be doing anything to compensate the teacher for that? Like, we'll be offering like a stipend like we do if they do clubs? Like, will they be getting paid for their time outside of, that they spend outside of the council preparing?
So I don't think that's unreasonable. That has to go through bargaining, though. I can't unilaterally decide that, but I think that's reasonable. We'll mention it.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Vice Chair?
I was just going to comment on the time period, but then you covered it. I think the bigger concern is just that, the following year, they can come right back and do it again. Is there any indication as to what other policies like this in other school districts have said? I thought I read 5 years somewhere in some other district.
Yes, one of the other districts, and I don't know which one off the top of my head, does have a 4 or 5 year determination period.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And Member Castellanos?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you could stay right there on that slide. I think the concern here is there's two different facets of this determination. One is if the committee finds that it did violate the statute, then I agree. Then it is, why should we consider bringing it back? It should be, that determination stands. But the other part above it says that if it doesn't violate the statute, but it may not be appropriate for a grade level or age group, then that determination, I think, could be reviewed again, because something else could change as well. What happens in one community may be different or perceived differently in another community throughout, even within Orange County. So I think that should be for a shorter span of time than the one that violates the statutes, and could be up for reconsideration to be brought back or sunset so that it automatically comes back after a number of years.
All right.
Yeah.
So once the School Literacy Council has come up with their written determination, the principal has 5 days to then send that written determination to the parent or the complainant. And that would also be sent to the appropriate area superintendent, associate superintendent, and or chief of high schools. If the parent or legal guardian or resident who filed the request for reconsideration does not agree with the School Literacy Council's determination, they would then have 10 working days to file an appeal with the principal. and a failure to file that written appeal within that 10 working days would be considered a waiver of any such appeal. If such appeal is received in a timely manner, it moves on to the district level. A formal request for reconsideration at the district level would be convened within 48 hours of the receipt of the repeal, which would mean that the associate superintendent or designee would then convene the district literacy council to review the determination of the school literacy council. The associate superintendent or designee would then also notify the school board of the district level appeal formal request. The district literacy council, or the associate superintendent, would appoint members to the district literacy council and then also serve as a facilitator for that group. And the district literacy council would include all of the following individuals. None of them would be from the originating school, however. So one school administrator, one parent, legal guardian, or resident of the county representing the school grade, one appropriate grade level certified educational media specialist, one appropriate grade level and subject area teacher, and one appropriate grade level student services representative.
All right, let's pause here. Member Casterdental.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any other comments about the policies. I just want to say thank you I know that when you presented to us one-on-one, we went through all of these and you answered so many questions then, and then here we have even more questions. This is a difficult policy to navigate, and I appreciate your attention and willingness to provide information. And thank you to my board members here, because it's hard for even all of us to get, right where we need to be. So thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Member Casterdental. It absolutely is hard, because I'm now struggling with this part of it. So we've got the parent or resident, and I'm not sure, because of the statutory language, that it applies to this appeal or only the first appeal. So we'll need to take a look at that, and maybe to be on the safe side, maybe there should always be a parent. Both. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm struggling with is, and maybe it is clear in here, but if we reach a determination that it violates statute, then it's coming off of all the library shelves or just that library shelf? And if it's just coming off of that library shelf and waiting for somebody to challenge it on another one, then what is our liability? I hate just to look at liability, because I think it's more of a right and wrong issue, and it's just wrong. But at a minimum, I think it's a liability issue to declare that it is in violation of statute to have it in this library and then keep it in another one until somebody gets around to challenging it. But I don't think that's clear in here. Okay.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
look at that.
We can work
All right.
on clarifying that in
Okay.
the policy.
We'll make it clear, if it's
Okay.
statutory, it needs to be district-wide.
Okay. All right, good. Vice Chair.
When you refer to associate superintendent, are you talking about deputy superintendent in the policy?
No, referring to
To me,
Rob.
I'm the one who currently handles when they come in
Okay.
to start the process, and then I report back.
Okay.
And that is based off of how KEC was written previously.
Okay. Is that, I feel like that's not very clear, though.
Okay.
We know that, but I don't think it's very clear in the policy. Maybe associate superintendent over curriculum.
We were trying to do
thing.
that, but that name has changed over the course of the years. So we were trying to.
Title has changed.
We didn't want to change the
years, so
policy
if
each time the title
With the
changed.
title, then it's
Right.
me, but if my title changes, then it had a couple different titles.
We'll just write your
Say
name into the
Rob.
policy.
Right. We'll just put your name in the policy. There we go. Also, a quick question about the teachers that are being chosen for these committees in both of these scenarios. Is this a teacher being told by a principal, or is it a volunteer?
Volunteer.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. that's also not very clear. And I realize that that might be also a bargaining issue. I don't know if that is or not, but I feel like that needs to be a little clear because it could turn into a principal telling teachers to do this and maybe they really don't want to, or can't, or don't have the time. Yeah. Appropriate grade levels. We had talked about this, I think, in our meeting about having students on the committee, and we decided no.
What we talked about was high school is currently where we potentially could have them, middle school and elementary. But if it's in policy and we say it's student, would you want a fifth grader being a part of it? So we left that out.
Okay.
Because it would be in policy and it would apply to, we couldn't define whether it be high school, middle school, or elementary. So we put it in the policy.
So the councils both say not be limited to the following members, but they must include an odd number of members. So that's where that would fit in.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that just raises another issue. So if we were even going to think about having a student, and if the challenge is that it violates Florida statute for us to have it in the library and make it available for our students to read, and then we have a student on a committee that's mandated to read something that we're going to determine nobody should have read and it shouldn't have been there, just doesn't feel very good to me to put a student in the process of determining whether, am I clear? I know I'm rambling,
I understand, but from our conversations, we just did not put student in there for multiple reasons, so we just left
but what you're saying is we might, because it's not excluded. I'm just
correct.
Pointing out that one of the problems with that is if it's to determine whether there's material that should never have been presented to our children, and then we ask to our students, and we ask one of our students to read the book to determine if they shouldn't have read the book, it's just, yeah, maybe if they're 18. If we have a couple of 18-year-olds, that would be fine. But I personally would be against having a student on there for that particular reason. Otherwise, having their input on it might be valuable, but I think given the fact that we're asking them to potentially read something that they shouldn't have had access to, just seems like an oxymoron or something.
Madam Chair, so then, but not limited to, could be taken out there so it's very precise on who's on the committee? Policies are usually pretty clear.
Yeah, or you could just in some way make it clear that it's not going to be, that students won't be permitted on the committees.
I didn't think of the issue until you just raised it. As long as that language, but not limited to, you leave it open.
You do leave it
wide open for anyone to insist on being included. I think policy ought to be pretty clear.
Yeah, that's true. Vice Chair.
Just to add to that, while I agree with you, I understand your concerns, I also don't like the idea of excluding students. And I understand your concern, but maybe we could circumvent that with a parent permission form, that they are giving their permission for the student to participate. Only because I think that with some of these materials that have come to us, the question of pornography necessarily is not the issue. It's the material, or it's the theme of the book. And I think the insight coming from our students is extremely valuable, because the kids living today are experiencing things that adults as children never experienced. So I think having their input on these committees as to why this particular piece of work is so important to them and their peers is super valuable for us evaluating whether or not it should be included. So I would hate to exclude them, but I certainly wouldn't want to expose them to anything that they shouldn't be. But I feel that maybe if we could get, a parent permission slip, that maybe that would clarify that. I don't know.
Let me, if I could ask Mr. Palmerini, I agree with the premise that if the reason that the book is being challenged is maybe whether it's age appropriate or has value, that having a student on there would be critical to making that determination. And so it would seem to me that maybe you would make a decision whether a student was there dependent upon whether that's what's being discussed, or whether you're discussing pornography and you're asking that student to define for you whether they think it meets pornography. So maybe there would be a different criteria. But the question I had for Mr. Palmerini or for Ms. Emval, but if we ultimately determine that something shouldn't have been in our library because it's excluded clearly by statute, do we eliminate any liability because a parent waived that? Does the parent get to waive I feel like the parent shouldn't get to waive the statute. And so I feel like it's still our responsibility. I know, parents should have lots of rights, but it doesn't seem like they should be able to waive the right. And that's just kind of a fundamental question that I have on this.
So there is case law that says people can waive either constitutional or statutory rights on their own behalf.
Right.
I don't think that means they can waive a constitutional right or a statutory right on behalf of another entity. Meaning, so I guess the situation is we make a determination that the book has pornography in it, and the parent says, "Oh, that's okay. I am giving my permission for my child to rent or to check out the book from the library." Is that basically the question?
Yeah. Does the parent have the ability to waive the liability for the child? And then that's where I'm struggling, and something internally tells me that the parent should not have the right, when the statute says this child should not be exposed to this, that the parent doesn't have the right to say, that's okay. It's all right for my child.
So I don't think that the statute or case law goes into that specifically. I've seen cases, it's a Shea versus Global Marketing, that says parents can sign waivers on behalf of their children because they have that right to direct the upbringing of their children. I don't think that a parent could say, you school district have to maintain a book on your library shelves if you've made the determination that it's pornography, and I should have the right to just give my permission in order to check that book out. I think we can make a determination that if the book contains pornography, we're just taking it off our shelves and we're not renting it to any parent, even if any child, even if the parent gives permission to do it. I think that's permissible.
So I'm not sure where the board will come down on this, but it seems like there's two choices here. And one would be that it would be the school's choice as to whether or not they want a student. Or at the district level, it would be the district choice as to whether or not to have a student. Or it could specifically say if the challenge is related to violation of section such and such, that a student won't be on there. If the challenge is related to whether it's age appropriate or whether it's, what's the other one? Of value, then a student could be. It seems like those might be the two options to bring to the board, because you want to bring something to us that we can sign off on, and I don't know where we are.
We can work with Mr. Palmerini on that
Okay.
on that last little bullet, see if we can clean it up and make it more clear, concise.
Okay. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, it occurs to me that, well, first off, I think that the purpose of the District Literacy Council is to determine those factors, right? Is it age appropriate? Is it pornography? I don't know that a determination in that would have occurred. There might have been a recommendation from the school, but in the next process, it goes to the district level. So I don't know. I think that's their job to determine if it meets that criteria. I think the purpose of these bills that came out of Tallahassee was for parental rights, to give the parents the right to make the best decision for their child. So if a parent said, I read the book, I discussed this book with my child, I am okay with that child serving on this committee, I think that they can offer input and insight. I personally don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think Member Gould said it earlier. I know that there are some books that I would read or discuss with my children that other parents would not be comfortable doing, and I respect that. I respect their wishes. But as a parent, if my child, especially because we're going to have students at high schools that are going to take a stand on these books. They're going to take a stand on either they like them or they don't, right? They've read them. They don't think that it meets the criteria. They're going to have very strong beliefs about these books. And I think that it's important that we give students that voice. They need that voice on this committee. And if a parent says, you know what, I agree with my child, I've discussed with my child, I'm fine with that child serving on the committee, I personally don't have a problem with it, and I don't think as a board we should have a problem with it. That's the purpose of these laws that are coming down from Tallahassee, is to give the rights back to the parent. So we shouldn't be taking the right from a parent to have a student serve on a council that they might be asking to serve on because they don't like the direction in which the school took or the direction in which they believe that the district will take. So I'm always going to be a big believer in involving parents and involving students, so students have a voice and they have a right to decide what's best for their education if allowed by the parent. So I think I'm okay with it. And then I'll let you, I know that you want to discuss this with the board, but I do have another question that you can circle back to me with.
No, I don't think we're going to probably land the plane on it today. Go ahead. What's your next?
I just appropriate grade level student services representative. I know student services, like why do we need appropriate grade level? What was the purpose for that? Like, can you give me?
If it's a high school book, we have a high school. If it's a social studies book, we'd have a high school. We'd have a social studies representative from the department. Student services could be a social worker.
But so student services aren't like different grade levels, correct? So why, like, if we're pulling somebody from student services to kind of look at that book?
If it was an elementary social work, elementary guidance counselor, social.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
By grade, by grade band, elementary, middle school,
Okay,
high
got
school.
it. All right. Thank you. I just needed clarification. Thank you.
Member Colbert.
Just some comments on the inclusion of students on the committee. I do not believe that students should be included in the determination of whether or not it is pornographic material. I do not think that is appropriate. I do think there's value of students giving input on theme or value, but I would also just caution, with the current climate, putting our students in that situation with controversial material, and being part of that. I just want to caution. I want to be protective of our children. Vice Chair is absolutely correct as to the value of their input, but I'm feeling a little protective in nature of putting students in that situation where we're talking about controversial issues. I don't have the answer, but I'm just bringing that up as a red flag.
Madam Chair.
Member Dr. Jenkins.
That is exactly why I had pushed my button earlier, because I want to at least be cautious, because I tend to be extremely protective of our children. I can think of a few instances here where children were standing at the microphone and response was not always what I would like for children that I want to be protective of. And so if there's a way to build, because these meetings have to be in the sunshine, which means an entire mob can come in on one side or the other. An entire group could come in because the meetings are in the sunshine. And I do want to protect children because they are still minors. I want to protect them from any kind of public mob scene. Not that it should ever come to that. Secondly, I think you also have to consider, if you pick one child, they are going to be probably on one side of the argument or the other. So then do you pick two children so both of their arguments can be considered? But when all that dust settles, I want to do no harm to young people who have to have their mental health and their self-value preserved in what has to be, Mr. Palmerini, correct me if I'm wrong, they have to be public meetings. They are sunshine meetings. And so that scrutiny, that backlash may actually be a part of those public meetings. So before I could actually get to it, Member Colbert mentioned the same concern. Whatever we do, let's make sure we are protecting our children in this environment, which we've witnessed in some of our meetings, that we make sure we're protecting their mental health and their well-being as well.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I had not thought of that situation, and I'm not agreeing with you because I was already leaning in that direction about students, but I am reminded of a time when I was just a commissioner. I don't mean I was just a commissioner. It was a long time ago, and I was a commissioner. And we had our Charter Review Commission, and there was a very controversial, it was actually the school overcrowding amendment that I had proposed. And there were grown men who were tormented by what decision to make and under tremendous pressure financially, and with friends in the audience who had, projects that might or might not go forward, and just the pressure that we had placed on people that, and we did it again this last time with the CRC, where people volunteer and they don't realize how much pressure sometimes comes with it. And so when I see the pressure that we've put adults under by asking them just to volunteer, and and they don't anticipate how much pressure can come from that, I think it is a valid point. Let's take and member Gould wants to be recognized. We'll take member Castrodano, vice chair, and then I'll go to member Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the value in having the students participate and what an educational experience it would be. If they're not members of the committee, I wonder if there are other ways that they could give input, maybe in writing. It could be, teachers don't have to assign it, but they could make it available. If this is a book that's an issue within that class, hurry up and read it before they ban it. And so we can discuss it. But also, it may be helpful or beneficial for those students to have access to the deliberations of that committee. Mm-hmm. I think that would be an excellent learning experience.
Several could participate instead of one.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Vice Chair.
Thank you. That was exactly what I was going to say. Is there a way that we could just, get input from them and maybe even include in the materials that the Literacy Committee reviews, student letters that have been written about the book, and maybe there's students that feel very passionately about the book and the impact it had on their life, and those are all important things, I think, for the committee members to be able to read. And then I was also thinking about the superintendent's student council. They would probably be a great group to, consult or ask, have you read this book? What are your thoughts? And then, submit that to the committee. But yeah, I think I agree. I understand your points. It is a lot of pressure. But I also really do value the importance of letting our students take part in decisions that affect their education, because that's one thing that they tell me a lot, that they feel like all the adults around them are making all the decisions and they don't ever have a voice. And so I really feel passionately about giving them that voice. So I would like to see us in some way be able to include that, but of course protect them at the same time.
Vice Chair, Member Gould. Member Gould. Member Gould, are you there? I might have lost her. All right, when she comes back, we'll recognize her.
Okay. In preparation for its review, the District Literacy Council will receive a copy of the originally filed request for reconsideration form. the educational philosophy of the district or the district vision and mission, reviews from reputable, professionally recognized reviewing periodicals about the challenged material. The District Literacy Council is then going to have 20 days to review and then convene to discuss their decision.
Hello.
Hi, you're recognized.
So sorry. Technical difficulty. I appreciate the previous comments of my board members, and I wanted to piggyback on that a little bit. I think this is a tremendous opportunity in a civics lesson, and maybe there is a way to structure a policy where we're not putting the children in the crosshairs of the law or making them victims, but give them a forum where there is discussion about whether a book is banned or not banned in our school system, and talk about how we got there and the reasonings behind what the committee came to that and how they came to that resolution. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It will be a little difficult to structure in policy, but I believe in our team. So if others thought that was a good idea, that would be my food for thought.
Thank you. And maybe if we went in that direction, rather than trying to structure something in policy, maybe there would be just a sentence about there being an engagement process.
The District Literacy Council shall also meet in the sunshine, and then they must have quorum in order to make a decision on the appeal. In reviewing the challenged material, the District Literacy Council shall review and understand the entire challenged material, and then they must also maintain their written minutes containing the start time, end time, all that good stuff. The District Literacy Council shall also issue a written decision on the appeal. In doing so, the District Literacy Council shall find either that the challenged material does not meet the criteria and or contains prohibited content under Section 1006.28 of the Florida statutes. If this is the case, the school shall discontinue the use of the challenged material for any grade level or age group for which such use is inappropriate or unsuitable. The challenge material does meet the criteria under Section 1006.28 of the Florida statutes. Next, the associate superintendent or designee would provide the District Literacy Council's determination to the parent or legal guardian who requested the reconsideration, and that would need to be done within 5 working days. The board, the principal, and or the assistant principal of the originating school would also receive that written determination. If the parent, legal guardian, or resident would like to file an appeal, they have 10 days to do so, or 10 working days to do so, and then if they do not do that within a timely manner, it would be considered a waiver of any such appeal. At that point, the appeal would move on to the school board. So within that 10-day period, they would have the opportunity to appeal, at which point the board would review the recommendations from the School Literacy Council and the District Literacy Council, and then render the final decision on the originally filed request for reconsideration at a properly noticed, regularly scheduled board meeting.
Okay. Question for you about timeframes. You've put the timeframes in there for the appellant. I think that would be the right term. I don't remember if there are timeframes for how long it takes each committee to hold their hearings, and if there are, I wanted to be mindful of, for instance, we're asking a teacher to volunteer time, and depending on the length of the book.
The School Literacy Council has 15 days. Working days, 15 working days, and the District Literacy Council has 20 working days.
Okay. And the board has how long?
It's not noted in the policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Again, it depends on the length of the book. It concerns me a little bit that I hear about how much time our teachers spend after hours just trying to keep up with a curriculum and grading, and we're asking them to read a book
The
So-
dates, again, we debated the dates, the time link ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's inappropriate to be speedy and
Right.
give information back, but the workload on the classroom teacher, the school, or the district. So we've
Yeah.
gone back and forth, and we'll obviously take suggestions, but we did
Yeah.
take that into consideration.
Because we considered holidays too.
Yeah.
Because the working days needed to be in there. And the board, we didn't necessarily have timelines set forth because we don't know when your next regularly scheduled meeting
Right.
could be.
Right. Right. And quite frankly, depending upon, there have been a couple of times when we've been inundated with hundreds to thousands of emails. I know we've all been through this where at 10 o'clock at night, we're still trying to respond to emails. So depending upon what else is going on, it could be difficult to get a book read, and I can't imagine anybody that's going to pass a decision on this without reading the book. So, all right, Member Castellano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just thinking that any high school teacher who would be interested is probably familiar with the book already, if it's one that they use in their course. So they may have already read it many times. So there's that possibility.
I'm thinking it's a library book that they might not have
They
read.
read those too.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, a
hadn't
lot of
thought of
times I
that.
think if
Yeah.
it's, they're familiar with many of the books that are in the library for
Okay.
those kids. Also, I have one question. Are the complaints about the instructional material, are they made public? Are they accessible to the public?
The request for reconsideration forms?
Yeah, well, I mean, once they're filled out, is it posted, or is it, if someone wanted to, know who's making these requests?
They are not posted on the website. We are not required to do that. We are required to submit them to the state based on House Bill 1467 beginning in June or July of 2023. So, yeah.
And if requested, it is public information.
Okay, thank you.
Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I answered my own question, but my question was, when the council makes their district council makes their determination, it comes before the board. It's not at the next notice meeting, right? I mean, we're going to have time, because if you guys decide on a Monday and we have a meeting on a Tuesday, I just want to make sure that as a board, we're going to want to review all the material and read the book ourselves, that we have enough time to do so.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what we put regularly scheduled, so it'd be when you determine one of your regularly scheduled meetings, you would determine what
Right.
meeting that would be at.
It can't be on the agenda? Oh, we can't add it. Okay.
Correct.
Right. It has to be properly noticed as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Go back to the.
Back to you.
deck.
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Palmerini.
I went back to the question you asked earlier about whether somebody could waive the right for us to have pornographic material in there. I went back and looked at the statute. Statute says that any material used in a classroom made available in the school library or included in a reading list that contains content that is pornographic or prohibited, a parent gets to present evidence on that. And it says if a school district school board finds that instructional material does not meet the criteria under subparagraph A, or the material contains prohibited content under subparagraph B, which is the pornographic material, the school district shall discontinue use of the material for any grade level. So I don't think you have any discretion, but if you determine that it's pornographic, we have to pull it off, and we can't allow a parent to override that decision and say, I would like my child to be able to rent it anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Palmerini.
All right, the next policy is policy IMB, teaching about controversial issues. We are recommending this policy for repeal because it was incorporated into policy IJL, and that was that statement where we need to work on clarifying it a bit. The next is KEC, Challenge Materials Policy. We are also recommending that for repeal since it is being incorporated into policy IJL.
Needed. Provide training to internal OCPS employees and external stakeholders regarding revisions to policies and new procedures. And with that, before I turn it back, I'd like to publicly thank Ms. Enval and John Palmerini for their help. As you can tell, they have spent countless hours with us. I don't know how they put up with us, actually, because we were going back and having meeting after meeting. So I want to thank them publicly. And back to Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you. I mentioned at the beginning that training for individuals who need to be involved in the purchase of materials will not take place by the Department of Education until January. So unless you have concerns otherwise, our direction is going to be that we have limited purchases until you receive your training for those schools that are in existence. Limited purchases that certainly the central office will assist media specialists with. For the most part, I think we can wait until January. For the brand new schools, they have to have a collection, and so central office will help them with those selections as well, because brand new schools got to have some books. But for the remainder, we are going to wait for that training in January to add substantially to any media center collection, unless the board has some concern over that. Secondly, concerning the K-3 teachers and getting them more specific information, we are sharing, as we shared with you, information from the Department of Education's motion to dismiss that provided some clarity. We're sharing that information. We are going to try to put together a 1 to 2 pager that gives some framework for our K-3 teachers so that they are not disturbed with the start of school. Only one other district has attempted a draft, and we have a copy of that draft. Others are working on it. We don't want to overstate what is not there. We will say plainly what is in the motion to dismiss for our teachers and what is a provision, what the provisions are in the actual statute. But before school starts, we'll certainly circulate that and make you aware of it as well. Perhaps we will get more detailed information prior to the start of school. If not, we will give the direction that we have thus far.
More than just 12.
Thank you. Any further business to come before the board? Yes, Vice Chair.
So Dr. Jenkins, thank you for that update. Will that, you said that that will be shared with the board before it's sent out?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to be mostly what you've already seen from the motion to dismiss.
Anything else to come before the board? All right. This work session is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I told you.